How's it going, everyone? I'm Evan.
I'm Bashkeen.
And we're the MTG guys, here with our third episode of 9 of the 99, Monocolored Edition.
I love playing monocolored cards because you're restricted to a smaller card pool. In these decks, you get to play fewer staples, and you get to play more niche cards that fit with your strategy. In this episode, we're going to go over 5 decks, one for each monocolor.
With that being said, let's get into our first commander. For mono green, we have Seton Krosan Protector. This is a mono green Druid Storm deck that's going to allow us to cast as many creatures from our deck and continuously tap those creatures for mana to draw more cards and cast more things. So we can either end the game out with a combo or with a big swing with Craterhoof Behemoth. Seton allows us to tap our druids for mana, but he taps them himself so they do not have to have haste in order to tap the turn they come in. This allows us to take advantage of cards like Glimpse of Nature, which is our first card in the 9. That allows us to draw a card every time we cast a creature spell, and when that creature comes into play, we can tap that for mana to continue to cast each creature card in our hand. Realm Walker and Vizier of the Menagerie are also going to allow us to cast our druid cards from the top of our deck, allowing us to keep casting more and more creatures to either draw more off Glimpse of Nature, or to fill our hand with our special pieces that we need to finish off the game. The next card is probably one of the most comical pieces of cardboard that Wizards of the Coast has produced, and that is Gilt-Leaf Archdruid. You can tap 7 druids to gain control of all lands target player controls. So we're going to try and storm out as many creatures as we can, tap 7 of them, and steal all of the lands one of our opponents has. It also lets us draw a card every time we play a druid spell, which allows us to continue to storm off and make more druids to take more people's lands. We need ways to produce more and more mana as we dig through our deck. Yes, we can play more creatures and tap them when they come in, but we need Mobilize, Vitalize, and Benefactor's Drought to untap all of our creatures so we can get more and more mana as we dig through our deck. Temur Sabertooth is just a piece that's going to allow us to return our creatures back to our hand and cast them again to get more cast triggers to draw more cards with our other effects. Temur Sabertooth also helps us with Aetherflux Reservoir, as we can return and cast with a bunch of mana one creature over and over again to gain a ton of life to bolt our players in the face for 50. Throne of the God Pharaoh is going to allow us to whittle down our opponents on each turn while we're setting up our combo, or, maybe that's going to be our win condition for the game, just keeping a bunch of creatures tapped and letting our opponents lose life equal to our number of tapped creatures. Craterhoof Behemoth is going to be an alternate win condition that if we have a bunch of creatures, we can just play Craterhoof Behemoth. All of our creatures are going to be enormously big and swing out for the game. A really interesting and probably one of my favorite cards in this deck, we have Slate of Ancestry. Yes, it's a 4-mana artifact and has an expensive activation cost, but we make a ton of mana in this deck, and it's going to, for 4 mana, let us discard our hand and draw cards equal to the number of creatures we control, which can be a ridiculous amount of creatures. So, that's going to help us refill our hand and continue to storm off.
Our mono-black pick is going to be Ayara, First of Locthwain. It's an Aristocrats-themed deck, but instead of triggering on creature death, Ayara triggers on black creatures entering the battlefield. The deck also has a strong devotion sub-thing, considering that Ayara on her own provides 3 devotion to black. The goal of the deck is to play an engine on turn 1 or 2 that either generates tokens you can use with Ayara as sack fodder for card advantage, or just card advantage engines directly. Then we want to leverage the value our commander generates to disrupt our opponents and set up one of our own 3-card combos or big aristocrat finishers to close out the game. Reassembling Skeleton is an easy creature to recur in this deck. You're going to sacrifice it with Ayara to draw a card, and then when you activate its ability, it's going to come back and drain all of our opponents. Next up is a trio of 2-mana spells that help us generate a token on each of our turns, with Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephalia, Dreadhorde Invasion, and Bitter Blossom. Jadar is definitely the most vulnerable of the 3, being on a human. However, he generates his token on our end step as opposed to our upkeep, so it's going to be faster than the other 2 options. Also, the token that he generates can be sacked to its own ability, considering that it's a zombie with Decayed. Dreadhorde Invasion and Bitter Blossom, however, both cost a life, which can be offset with our commander in play. These cards let us generate tokens that we're going to use as sack fodder and fuel for the rest of the game, for the rest of our deck. Oath of Ghouls is a weird 2-mana enchantment that's on the reserve list. It's a mirrored effect, so it allows each player, at the beginning of their upkeep, to return a creature from the graveyard to their hand, as long as they're not the player with the least amount of creatures in their graveyard. However, us, as the graveyard recursion deck that wants to be sacrificing our creatures and generating value via that avenue, we're definitely going to be breaking parity with our opponents and generating the most value with this enchantment. Phyrexian Reclamation is another way we can recur our creatures in mono black. It just comes down on turn 1, and then by turn 2 you can start returning your creatures by just paying 1 in a black and a little bit of life. Contamination is a pretty mean stacks piece I like playing in my mono black lists. It pretty much puts all of our opponents off any mana that they care about, and who cares if our mana only taps for black because we're playing a mono black list. Also, the sacrifice clause can easily be overcome with all the ways we're going to be generating tokens and sack fodder in this deck. With how many creatures that are going to be entering and leaving our graveyard, Sir Conrad is straight up a win condition. He pings every single time we do anything in this deck. So our opponents are going to be taking so much damage. We can also use him as an outlet for all of the black mana we're going to generate with our really good black lands. Wizards has admitted that Phyrexian mana was a mistake. Kirik, son of Yawgmoth, is one of the worst offenders. He lets us go off in this deck. You can cast him on turn 4, cast Ayara, then the very same turn for only 6 life. You gain the life from Ayara, and you can just start dumping all the cards from your hand by using Phyrexian mana instead of black. We generate enough life in this deck using our commander and a variety of other effects that we don't have to worry about the life cost of cards like Kirik. One of the unique benefits of playing a monocolored deck that has 3 black pips in the cost is that our devotion to black is going to be super high. Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, is one of the cards that allows us to take most advantage of this. On the first turn, with our commander out, it still generates 3 mana. I've seen this get crazy though. We're playing a ton of enchantments, a ton of creatures, and they all have black pips in their mana costs. I've seen Nykthos generate up to like 12 mana in the past. Oftentimes, aristocrat decks find themselves with the highest life total at a table by virtue of draining out their opponents while gaining life themselves. Plague of Vermin lets us turn this life advantage into an immediate win by turning our life total into 1/1 black rat tokens. Each of these tokens triggers Ayara, which restores our life to the original amount and drains each opponent for the amount of life we put in. If we were at the highest life total when the spell resolves, we will win the game. Also, even if somebody tries to get clever or cheeky and try to kill Ayara in response to the spell, the amount of life you pay is chosen on resolution, so you don't have to go down to 1 life if you don't have Ayara in play. Also, if you don't have Ayara in play, you can just cast this, pay like 15 or 20 life, and make like 15 or 20 rat tokens and use them for advantage with the rest of your deck.
When we think of mono red, a tribe that comes to mind is goblins, but there's another ridiculous chaotic tribe that is so fun to play, and that is with Zerzoth Chaos Rider, we're playing devils. Devils have weird expendable traits that can ping people off. They have discard synergies where you can mess with people's hands, you can filter through your own hands, and really you can just kind of make the game incredibly chaotic and super fun to play with and against. Zerzoth is going to take advantage of our opponents drawing cards on other people's turns. He's also going to give us an outlet to do that on attack trigger to make as many devils as we possibly can. This is a personal deck of a friend of ours, and he's been working on it for quite a while. And let me tell you, it is so fun to play against, and it looks so fun to play with, that I think a deck like this will always be fun to have at the table. The first card on the 9 is Burning Inquiry. This is going to make every player draw 3 cards, then discard 3 at random, which is going to create some ridiculous chaos in the game. It's going to mess with your opponent's hands, and it's going to set you up by making you 3 devils that you can later use to ping off creatures, to deal extra damage, or to use with other effects. This next card is one of my absolute favorite cards. I have it in a bunch of my own personal decks. It's called Idol of Oblivion. Any deck that makes tokens needs this card because it's just 2 mana, draw a card every turn. So basically every time you make a devil, you're going to be able to tap this to draw a card. Temple Bell is usually played in group hug strategies. However, if we tap this on an opponent's turn, it's going to give us 2 additional devils on each circle, giving us 5 devils per round. Now, even though our opponents are discarding at random, so are we. So let's try and take advantage of that in as many different situations as we possibly can. Starting with Library of Lang, this is going to allow us to put the card, if we would like to, even though it's discarded at random, we can still put that card on top of our deck or in our graveyard. So if we accidentally discard one of our favorite cards, we can just put it right on top of the deck. Bag of Holding is going to take all of our discarded cards and hold them in a bag, and then we can always sacrifice that later to get all those cards back into our hand. Geth's Grimoire is going to make us draw a card every time our opponents discard a card. So, during combat, if you attack each player with 1 devil, you're going to net 3 cards. So we've created a weird chaotic engine with this devil deck, but how are we going to finish off the game? Well, we've got Purphoros, God of the Forge. Every time a creature enters the battlefield, each opponent is going to take 2 damage, which is going to escalate very quickly with the amount of devils we're creating. Next we have Shared Animosity. This is a 3 mana enchantment that's going to give our devils +1/+0 for each other devil on the battlefield. So as they grow, they're going to get stronger and stronger and make it very difficult for our opponents to stop them. One of the most flavorful cards in the deck has to be Burn at the Stake. This is going to allow us to tap any number of creatures we control and deal 3 times that number to any target. This is going to be a way to close out the game, especially with a damage doubler or tripler. It's going to be a ridiculous amount of damage and super fun.
Orvar is a mono blue commander that wants a combo. His ability is extremely powerful, allowing you to create copies of key pieces in order to generate insane value. The deck is packed full with low CMC instants and sorceries that target our own permanents in order to make copies of them. Orvar is one of the few ways in Magic we have to create token copies of lands, so you can also find yourself ramping out of control in a way that most mono blue decks would be extremely envious of. Clock Spinning and Whim of Volrath are the 2 best ways to repeatedly target our own permanents in the deck. The text on these cards don't matter besides the fact that they target a permanent we control and they have buyback. Even without other pieces, 3 to 4 mana to create a token copy of our permanents is on rate for the effect. With things like High Tide in play or multiple copies of a Sapphire Medallion, however, these cards can get out of hand extremely quickly. These are probably going to be the cards you're tutoring for when you're ready to win the game. Coveted Jewel is a card I really love in the deck. It provides both mana and card advantage on a permanent that we can easily copy with our commander in play. The downside of this card is that you have to win the game when you first cast it. If you allow an opponent to attack you once this is out, you're going to be giving them tons of cards and mana, which is not a winning strategy in Commander. Mind's Dilation is an absolute bomb in this deck. Having just 1 copy of this card in play isn't that great. But once you start making like 4 or 5 copies, whenever an opponent casts their first spell, you're going to be going so deep into their deck, you're for sure going to get more advantage than they will off their own spell. Scourge of Fleets is another 7 mana bomb your opponents are going to hate when you make copies of. The ability is on ETB and it's only one-sided, so your opponents simply aren't going to be able to keep any creatures in play while you just chill with an army of 6/6s. If you thought having 1 Orvar in play was good, how about having 2 or more with Sakashima of 1,000 Faces? Normally, Orvar's ability only triggers when he targets another permanent, but if that permanent is also an Orvar, then you are going to create an army of token copies that trigger anytime you cast an instant or sorcery. Propaganda is a card I normally hate to play in Commander, because if somebody really wants to, they can still attack you. However, when you have like 4 or 5 copies of Propaganda in play, it's simply impossible for anyone to attack you, and you're pretty untouchable. Cloudpost is a really cool land you don't really see in Commander because it's a singleton format. However, in Orvar, when you can make multiple copies of this, it gets out of hand extremely quickly. Ipnu Rivulet is another really good land with our specific commander. It is an outlet if we have infinite copies of anything. If you can make infinite lands, you can mill out each of your opponents. Last up is a well-known mono blue storm piece in High Tide. The card on its own ramps you extremely hard for 1 turn, but there are tons of ways to abuse it with cards like Archaeomancer and Mystic Sanctuary, which allow you to return it to either your hand or the top of your library respectively. The card will let you have an extremely explosive turn to either allow you to win or to set you so far ahead your opponents will be scratching their heads wondering where you came from.
For mono white, we have Mavinda, Student's Advocate. This is a strange, mono-white Spellslinger-type commander deck where we try and abuse low-cost cantrip and flicker instants and sorceries to gain card advantage. The first spell in the 9 I want to go over is Ephemerate. This is a 1-white instant speed flicker with rebound. This is going to allow us to abuse any of our good ETBs and as well as Mavinda, because Mavinda only lets us cast a spell once each turn from the graveyard, but Ephemerate flickering it will allow us to do that multiple times. So we need creatures with great ATBs to abuse with our flicker spells. Spirited Companion and Wall of Omens are going to allow us to draw several cards every time we cast a flicker spell on it from our hand or from the graveyard using Mavinda's ability. Defiant Strike is a 1-mana instant that's going to give a creature +1/+0 and allow us to draw a card. This is going to give us 2 draws for 2 white mana. Monastery Mentor is going to give us a token every single time we cast an instant or sorcery. And since Mavinda allows us to cast them from the graveyard, we're essentially going to get 2 tokens for each spell we cast. We have a lot of effects that are going to give us enter the battlefield triggers. Cathar's Crusade is one of the ways to abuse those ETBs by giving us a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. So this also allows us the opportunity to go wide with maybe some other options. Precursor Golem is going to be the best target for any of our cantrip spells because it's going to copy it for each golem on the battlefield, so we're going to get multiple draws per spell. Cemetery Protector is another one of those cards. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, we're going to be able to exile a card from a graveyard, and whenever we play a card that shares a type, we're going to get a 1/1. So our goal is to shoot for an instant or sorcery in an opponent's graveyard, exile it, and so then we're going to start pumping out more and more tokens to abuse our ETB triggers. And one of our main win conditions is Altar of the Brood. This is going to, one, either take an infinite ETB combo to mill everyone's deck, or slowly mill people throughout the game by flickering and making tokens. Now we do get to play one pretty spicy card, but it costs 7. Sphinx Bone Wand is going to give us a damage that grows every time we cast an instant or sorcery spell. So starting with 1 counter, it's going to deal 1 damage to any target. And every time we cast an instant or sorcery, it's going to go up, dealing 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. So eventually either we're going to blast every player's creatures off the board, or be able to just blow up people by shooting them in the face with Sphinx Bone Wand. Thank you all for watching. All of our deck lists are in the description below. Make sure to check them out and leave us a comment.
Don't forget to drop a subscribe and a like if you enjoyed our video.